how expensive is probate? And then the very next one is, why is probate so expensive? So how expensive is it?
So I guess everything's relative, right?
Right.
And so, the cost of probate in most cases, again, estate sizes vary dramatically. Everyone has an estate. The size of the estate, though, can be multiple millions of dollars. It can be very modest. Obviously, the fewer assets you have, the simpler the assets are, the less expensive that process would be. The more complicated things are, then the more costly it's going to be, simply because of the time involved in managing those assets during that probate period. So with that giant caveat, the typical Mississippi probate that we see, someone that dies owning a home, owning a couple of cars, has a checking account and savings account, that's a fairly typical estate, mom and pop type of estate. Those probates generally run, as long as we're not selling real estate during the probate, between $3,500 and $5,000 is a fairly typical fee for that. If we're selling real estate or some other property that requires a court order and court approval before we can do it, the cost of that is going to increase a little bit, because there's some extra work we've got to do. We usually have to get an appraisal on it to show the world that we're treating fairly everyone, because there's a potential for creditors to be cheated, if you will, if we made a sweetheart deal to someone. So there's some steps there, and then we have to get court approval generally for those types of transactions. And so those additional steps will take additional time and cost additional money. So it's not unusual in those cases for the probate to cost somewhere between $7,000 to maybe as high as $10,000. Now, that being said, I've participated in probates where the attorney's fees were tens of thousands of dollars. I've participated in probates where the attorney's fees have exceeded $100,000. Those are complicated estates, though, with lots of moving parts, and that take lots of time. So that is not the typical estate at all. The typical estate where you've got, again, a couple of accounts, some real estate, and a couple of cars, and such. Generally speaking, it's going to take about 9 months, and it's going to cost somewhere between $3,500 and $5,000 in my experience.
And is it typically the responsibility of the heir, your consumer, for this? Is the heir to an estate?
So statutorily, there's a kind of a hierarchy, if you will, of people that are preferred to be the ones to open the estate, or preferred to be the ones managing the estate. And so if you're married, a spouse obviously fits in there. If not, then the siblings, or children first actually, then siblings. And so there's a statutory order that goes in. Generally speaking, it is a relative of some sort. Usually people aren't clamoring about who should be it. It's usually a chore that someone has. If you have a will, then you actually get the privilege of naming who that person's going to be. So you name an executor, and that person then would have the first authority and obligation to step forward and probate that will and seek appointment by the court to fulfill their role.